Welcome to DMV Spotlight on ESPN 630, the sports capital, where we shine a light on local stories from D.C., Maryland, and Virginia to inform, enlighten, and inspire you. I'm Barbara Britt. You know, the holiday season is upon us, and that can bring both great joy and it also can bring a variety of other emotions. So I'm delighted to welcome to DMV Spotlight on ESPN 630 Michael Shea. He's a licensed clinical social worker, and he provides holistic psychotherapy services for individuals, couples, families, groups, and the entire Washington metro area. He's an integrative psychotherapist, and he's been in private practice in the D.C. area. He has over 25 years experience, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us again on DMV Spotlight.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, Barbara. Thank you kindly for having me.
Thank you, Michael. So, as I said, I think we all look forward to the holidays. We're excited, love seeing the lights and all the festivities and family, but there's a whole host of other emotions that the holidays bring up. And I think let's start with the one that's so clear to us, of people who are now dealing with going into a holiday, having lost somebody that they love, a family member, somebody close to them. And there's that empty chair, there's unspoken feelings, there's spoken feelings. Walk us through that.
You know, it's such a sensitivity that you have, an attunement to what's going on, because grief and loss, first of all, it has a process of its own. None of us get it, what I say, a get out of jail card free of having to deal with this, because we all are going to die, and that's a reality. Well, the question often is, how do we manage that process? And particularly for those of us that are left behind, holidays particularly spotlight grief and, like you said, the empty chair, the traditions, who's going to be the holder of the tradition if the person who's died is not there and is being the one primarily to hold the tradition. So a lot of what I invite people to do during the holidays is name the reality, claim it. Let's be overt. Someone has died, and the person who is bereaved, the family member or the spouse who has lost somebody, it's actually best for them to initiate and say, hey, look, I want to do something to commemorate this person and recognize them. And it takes the proverbial sort of elephant out of the living room, and it gives a permission to recognize that the person's no longer there and we're doing something new.
You know what? That is such an amazing point, because I think people are, number one, I don't know if this is just an American thing. We don't talk about death. We don't deal with death. We don't see death. I mean, in the old days in America, you did. You would sit with somebody when they died, and they'd be in your house, and people would come, and you would see it.
People wear black, and all those things.
All of those things that would happen, and none of that is quite removed now, and therefore it's kind of like going to the grocery store and going, where did the meat come from? I don't care. I'm just going to pick up the package. That was a diversion. So that's where I think we struggle. And somebody who had lost somebody very close to them had told me one time, it's not like they're not thinking about it already, but we walk around on eggshells as if we're going to upset them.
Right.
They're already upset.
They're already upset. And I think, I've heard so many people, it's just as a sort of short tangent, people who have lost somebody at a funeral, they often, when they stand in some kind of experience of receiving, people that are coming to recognize the deceased and their loss, they often stand and they notice how often they're comforting other people who are experiencing sadness or grief or bereft feelings. And that somehow that puts them in the position of not always being able to express their feelings. I say that at holidays, this is an opportunity to give yourself that opportunity to have a moment of recognition. Take the initiative. Don't wait in the wings, because oftentimes that causes a suppression, which affects the body, which causes potential explosions. No, do it with intention.
And so let me ask, sometimes in some ways the harder question. None of us is perfect. We all have high points and low points. We have good points and bad points, and nobody knows that more than our families. When a family member is gone or a dear friend, is it okay to remember all of those elements about them? Because you tend to deify people who've gone beyond. That's all. You don't hear the bad stuff. And not that that should be highlighted, but how do you do that and keep it real?
Right. And that is a thoughtful way of thinking of it, because it's a balance. None of us is perfect as a human being.
Thank heaven. What a relief.
Thank goodness, right? And I think what has to be made room for is when somebody is expressing the emotions, particularly around the holidays, the consideration needs to be that the holidays are about making memories. We want memories that are good memories. And so what happens, for example, if somebody has an outburst at the table of emotions? Well, I think the number one thing is take a breath, let the person have their moment, and say, hey, look, how can we be supportive? Maybe we could do something in this moment to recognize that this person impacted us both in a challenging way, but also in their goodness. And I think to see it in a balanced approach really offers us a sense of a recognition of the person, the relationship, and the fact that we're still healing and there's still a process of grief and a letting go and trying to establish a new normal. I sort of liken this to the reality that the Buddhist principle says about the cycle of life. There's sort of a birth, life, death, rebirth. And the rebirth is when someone has died, our new normal. What kind of traditions will we create in a way that recognize not only the person, but that we have to move on? There's a process.
And you do know in certain faith traditions, there are, like the lighting of a candle that you mentioned. Have you seen other type ceremonial? Do those things help us, or they bring us stability? How do they help us?
Ritual. So I think we're really talking about ritual. And we now know that ritual, from a lot of the brain neurological research, every day you and I do rituals when we get up out of bed and we brush our teeth, and we have our rituals around exercise and our rituals around cooking, and even our rituals about how we live with one another. Ritual at this time has a value, because it does two things. It acknowledges the obvious, but it also offers us an opportunity, and this is the ancillary benefit. It can bring us to a higher awareness. It can bring us to insight and wisdom and understanding. And I think sometimes when we light a candle, we're taking a moment to recognize the comprehensiveness of the relationship, but to recognize that there's still a connection, a love in our heart. Even though it may not be physical, it's still a connection.
And I like that, because I also like that feeling that as the people would contribute to that ritual, that now is a new shared experience that they all have, that they've all participated in, because maybe their relationship to the person who is gone obviously was different depending on who they are and where they were relationally to them.
Right. I'm currently wrapping up a 12-week group around grief, loss, and transitions. And the last 3 weeks, what we're doing as a group is ritualistically remembering the losses that they experienced, and then a way to identify where they grew as a result of that, and ways that they can commemorate, and what's still left over that's painful that they might come up with some strategies to address, so that there can be a letting go.
And that is such a powerful truth, because so many times in our own lives, whether it's grief or loss or a challenge or actual pain that we've had to walk through, those are the times we grow the most.
Those are the times we grow the most.
That is absolutely, none of us would choose it.
None of us would choose it.
Yet, hopefully we come to a point where we're at least thankful for the experience, and hopefully, as you said, that what we learn out of it, that we would learn some wisdom.
Exactly.
And maybe to extend a little more grace to
one another. A little more grace, right.
That would be nice.
I have one personal experience to share with you about this. So when I was 19, my mother died, and I was at college at the time, and I was getting a two undergraduate degrees. One was a concentration in philosophy, and I had found out that I had one course short of getting this philosophy concentration. So my advisor said to me, you need to take a winterim course, 3-week course. I said, okay, whatever it is, I'll take it. My mother had died in the April before. The course was the philosophy of death.
Oh, my.
I hadn't paid attention. I walked into the course. There were 22 of us in the class. The class met every day from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. for 3 weeks, including Saturdays and Sundays. And there was this moment, unbeknownst to me, that I was given to deal with grief and loss. The first 4 days, all I did was sit and weep. It didn't matter that it was very academic. The content moved me, and somehow that compilation of people became a process that offered me a healing. So I think we need to be open to the various things that can open us up. And the holidays, we can do that with intention. I don't often recommend to people, don't let it happen sort of as a surprise, because I don't think the professor had anticipated that I was going to be that emotional for 3 weeks.
You know, but that's such a good point, because I feel like, especially at the holidays, which are, quote, meant to be joyful, that there is sometimes that weeping, and that makes us uncomfortable when we see a great display of emotion
exactly.
that seems out of place, at least to our understanding. And yet, sometimes that's what's needed, because that's the catharsis. That's what we need to move forward as part of our grief process.
I didn't know then, but I will say this. Tears are good because they're cortisol releasing, and cortisol is a stress hormone. So I say to people, you know what, you're getting rid of some cortisol when you cry. That's a good thing.
That's very good. That's very good to know. I can save that nugget. I'm speaking with Michael Shea this morning. He's an integrative psychotherapist and a private practitioner right here in Washington for over 25 years. And we're talking about some of the various emotions that we deal with over the holidays. Let's talk about some of the expectations that we have either on ourselves or for others. Talk about how that comes to be, and maybe we say, you know what, I want to do it differently this year, or I don't want to have certain expectations. I just want to enjoy where I am right now. Talk to us about where that all comes from.
Well, I think you and I both know, because of advertising and also because of consumerism, the various notion around the holidays is it has to be perfect. You know, somehow we have to make this perfect. I don't know who established the perfect perception, but somehow they established it. It's a myth. So stop. This is what I say to people. We need to get out of this myth that the holidays have to be something. Rather, like I said earlier, the holidays are about creating a memory with family, with our friends, a community, with a group of people where we commemorate and celebrate a set of values and principles, or a recognition of something that happened in the past that made a difference, that caused us to stop and pause. And I often say that people set their expectations very high, that somehow there's a Herculean notion of I should be able to operate at 18 hours a day and very little sleep, and my bank account should have unlimited funds in it. And you know, there's this it's just
so guilty as charged. I always get to that point several days just before Christmas, and I sit there and I go, okay, if I don't sleep between now and Christmas Eve, everything might get done. And guess what? Christmas comes every year, whether I am ready, Michael, or not. Here it comes, or Hanukkah, or whatever you're celebrating. And so that, I think some of that is other people's expectations for us.
Right. So let's talk about it in terms of how much of that is groupthink, whether it's groupthink of a family or a culture or a community. And I think there's a necessity for us to have groupthink. I don't want to undervalue that. However, if groupthink puts a stress on us, or we could nuance traditions that are reflective of where we are today. So, for example, let's go back to the issue of grief. If where we are today because of grief is there's lower energy, then maybe we want to tweak things. But it's about being in the now and reflective of where am I today? And I think setting expectations in a realistic way requires us to slow down and think and be reflective. How much bandwidth do I actually have to do all the things that my mind tells me I should do? And match that with the reality, whether it's time, energy, resources.
And that's such a good point, because people do, I don't want to get us off too far on a financial tangent, but people do overspend.
Right.
We overeat. We overdrink.
Right.
We overextend over everything. Yes, I'll be at this thing. Yes, I'll be here. Yes, I'll be able. You can't. Mm-hmm. You're human.
Right.
It's not all going to happen.
No. Sorry, there's 24 hours in a day. You cannot make it 36.
So, for the person who's listening today, mm-hmm. and maybe doesn't have a family or friends and knows that they're going to be walking through holidays alone, maybe for the first time, mm-hmm. A special word for them?
Right. I think that's incredibly sensitive and thoughtful. I think when holidays hit us and we realize, for whatever reason, we don't have something planned, it's a very powerful sense of loneliness and aloneness, particularly because everyone else is sort of doing something.
Or they seem to be.
Or let's go to another where the tradition that the family follows does not celebrate, let's say, one of those holidays. That can be a loneliness, but both sort of are important. I think it's necessary to be proactive. I think, again, go back to intention. I think it's important for people to come up with a plan and assess, okay, how am I going to manage? What can I do? So let's talk about some things that can be options. One could, if they're alone, say, hey, can I come? They could ask. That would be perhaps overriding a social norm, which is to invite oneself, but that's a self-initiated way of good self-care. So that could be one that could be a little bit more vulnerable. The other is go out and volunteer. What would it be like to become a part of a community where people are in need and I could celebrate a sense of community? Maybe not my family or friends, but I can know that I belong. Or what if I also decide I'll do my own celebration? I'll take myself out, or I'll do something for me. Those are proactive steps versus being in a space of aloneness, potentially feeling sorrow for oneself in a way that keeps one stuck, where one might use a self-medicating behavior. That's not a good proactive way, and it's not good self-care. So I invite people to take the bull by the horns in those moments.
And one of the reasons I love talking to Michael is because you offer such pragmatic ways to deal with the realities of life, and I am so thankful for that. Tell me about. You're welcome. Tell me about the other parts of simply just the physical lack of stress, exhaustion. Even if you are pretty good about setting some boundaries for yourself,
right,
and saying, okay, I'm not going to eat everything on the holiday table, or I'm not going to go to every single event. And we live in the DC area. There's tons of events, and they're wonderful.
Right.
But how important is it, as you mentioned, some self-care for taking care of yourself? I mean, this is winter time. This is, flu time. This is
right. Our immune systems are changing because of the seasons. I mean, these are just natural phenomenon that do impact our sense of well-being. So I often say that people, when we are in a time of stress, there are a couple tried and true ways to deal with our stress. One is get out for a walk. Do something, move the body.
Change the temperature.
Change the temperature. It helps. The other is perhaps look at something artistic. There's a way the arts become a powerful vehicle of not only expressing our emotions, but helping us to feel an empathy or a connectedness universally with other people. I say do something in the arts, do a creative expression.
Is that unique to arts, music, that connects us to other people, or is that anything that fully absorbs you?
Well, I think arts particularly do, because what arts have and I just was talking about this not long ago in a presentation I was giving on decoding the unconscious mind. The unconscious speaks through symbols, images, words. Those are the actual content of the arts. Words, symbols, images, they are the melodies. So sound. And I think when people utilize the arts, whether they're expressive arts, visual arts, the vocal arts, performing arts, somehow what it does is it takes us an awareness from within, and it invites us to be connected to people outside of ourselves. And usually the intersection point is it speaks to something universal that we can all identify with.
And do you also find that when you're doing something artistic or exercise or whatever it is that completely absorbs you even for a short time, even for an hour, that's kind of a palate cleanser for the brain, for lack of a better expression, that it just gets you, because you don't have room for anything else in the brain right now. You're just focused on this one thing in front of you, whether, as you said, music, visual arts, or creating something, being part of a creative process, or even cooking maybe.
Or
for
even
some
cooking,
people.
Right. It's another creative expression. What I love about you is that you get a lot of psychological issues and theory in a very quick way. So what the arts do is they activate the right side of the brain. Our left side of the brain is very much about logic and systems and numbers. And the right side of the brain is about our intuitive, our more emotional capacities, our how do we deal with consensus building. So the arts afford us a way from out of our thinking brain into our brain around sort of what goes on in our imagination, our musings, our intuitions. And I think it becomes a vehicle to let go of anger, fear, hurt, loneliness. And so when people are in a place of strife, I invite them pretty continuously to utilize art as an expression. And the other thing that I try to do is say, look for things that lift you up. Read things that are of inspiration or that offer you a way of thinking that you hadn't thought before, which is knowledge. It gives us, even if we don't agree with it, we have an expansion of an understanding.
And a new neural pathway, which we love.
Which we like.
Especially as we age. We like our new neural pathways. We're thinking of different things, and that is very good for our brain.
Exactly. So these are some of the things that would, in terms of someone being alone or somebody who doesn't follow that tradition, finding other ways to express so that they have a sense of connectedness, even from within.
That is amazing. And I want to talk about when we gather for these holidays, that sometimes you might have college kids coming home, you might be going back as an adult to your parents' home, or they may be becoming aging parents, or that you just are now. We all wear many roles. We all have many roles and wear many hats. But you go back into a situation where you're the child of this person. You want to be respectful to your parent, of course, but now you're a grown person. Mm-hmm. So talk to us about there can be some conflict potentially there. How do we walk through that?
When we deal with issues like kids coming home or aging parents or even, people that have a proclivity to revert back to old childhood roles in families. I, when I sit with somebody, often talk about this as moments of transition. How do we deal with, and another word for transition is change. How do I deal with the change? And I think all of us struggle with transitions and change. It's not comfortable, sort of the awkwardness. How do I talk about this? Similar to what we were saying earlier. The first thing I say is, the best thing to do is to acknowledge the obvious. So let's deal with the parent who is a child coming home. hey, before the child comes home, or they're young adults. I mean, really, they're adults. There's the college age students. I think the best way to handle this is to have a conversation beforehand and say, hey, look, you've been away for X number of time. We've had our own rhythm. Can we talk about how we want to deal with everything from time to your expectations of what you'd like to do with your time to what we'd like to do with you? Sort of put it out there beforehand, because it offers this sense of a recognition. Yes, things are different. And it also offers that I care about this relationship.
That's a nice way to look at it, because a lot of times people can feel threatened, or you come from a background where things just simply aren't talked about.
Exactly.
But you can break that mold.
You can break that mold. And I think by breaking the no talk rule and talking about the obvious
out loud,
it really de-escalates the amount of stress, expectations, we did it this way. Or the other thing I think that happens, which is we have this notion of mind reading, that somehow we should read someone else's mind. Like, somehow I'm going to be a clairvoyant, I should.
I love Claire. Sit right here.
And that doesn't work. So when we talk about this in terms of, let's use the example of an aging parent, even though we all see parents age, when we have that phenomenon, we have to ask, when there's a family gathering, can we all participate and be aware of what's going on? Can you notice what's happening with the elder? Do they need help? Bringing out a consciousness, again, acknowledging the obvious. It's very, very important that we do that, because our seniors have a value.
Absolutely. And one of the lessons that I have personally learned, it's good to ask what they actually want and not assume that you know what they do actually want, because in your efforts to help, you may be helping from your point of view, but not necessarily from theirs.
Their point of view, right. And the helping might hurt. It might diminish, and that's not what we're intending to do.
And speaking of hurting and not helping, we could talk forever and ever, but I do need to mention before we close out, we are in a time where our lives just seem divided. The news, and you are coming together with different family members, and they all have opinions that they're allowed to have. But how do you maintain civility at your things? Nobody wants a big ugly scene. I don't think anybody wants that. No. How do you maintain that?
So in a brief way of maintaining this, I think the part is intention. If we bring up controversial subjects and we're bringing them up for the purpose of grandstanding or being better than or somehow othering, that is not a good intention, particularly around creating a memory. However, if our intention is to bring it up to gain understanding, as long as we can acknowledge that if there are points of intersection, we can acknowledge there's points of intersection. Where there's points of difference, we can acknowledge to agree to disagree. And then the other thing I think that's very important is listening with an open heart. When we listen to somebody from a different point of view, they're sharing themselves with us. That's a gift. That's intimacy. So listening with an open heart, we might learn something. We could potentially learn something from somebody's different point of view.
And wouldn't that be an awesome holiday?
That would be an awesome holiday and a great memory.
So I want to thank you so much. If you've been listening today and you're thinking, wow, I would like to hear more from Michael Shea, you can check out his website, www.michaelfshea, and Shea is spelled SHEA.com. So it's www.michaelfshea.com, and we'll have all the information on our website at ESPN.com. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, for helping us think about our holidays and how we want to create these memories and be part of a larger community, and to really understand what a gift we all have from one another in spending that time together.
Well, thank you. And it was lovely to be with you and the sound engineer, Ken, again. So thank you.
Always thanks to Ken. Thank you for mentioning him. So thank you so much for joining me today and listening on DMV Spotlight on ESPN 630. I'm Barbara Britt.